Today on the podcast, we have our second episode in the January 2024 news updates for the Disney company. We look to update the battle for the Disney board. We'll take a look at how discounting is the continued strategy for the Florida resort and what it means for guests. We'll look at Magic Key sales in California that are set to open later this week. We'll talk about how the battle over Reedy Creek is getting ready to move into the courtrooms. And lastly, we'll take a detailed look at Luminous, the new nighttime spectacular at Epcot, with an eye toward what to look for when you see it in person, and how the presentation uses a range of visual elements to create meaning, much in the tradition of Illumination's Reflections of Earth. So, once more, we have a lot to cover today. Last week, when we looked at an overview of the company as a whole for 2024, we had a script of 6,000 words. This week, we're over 8,000 words on our script. We have an omnibus arrangement today with many stories, but we still aren't even to the end of those topics I wanted to cover in our monthly updates for January. But I'm trying to cover each area with depth and specificity, more depth and detail than you'd likely find in a newspaper article. So there are still update stories to explore later this month, but right now for this episode, our plate is very full. By the time this episode posts, my kids will have their backpacks packed, their lunches made, and be all set for the return to school after winter break. And this means that overall, we're moving back into regular life, beyond the festivities and the relaxation of the break. And on the podcast as well, we're back to all of our regular topics. Also, before I get started, I need to thank another round of recent Bandcamp subscribers. These are the people who keep this whole enterprise going. You see, I don't want to break up our shows with ads. I want each listener to be able to focus in on our weekly topics without having their concentration broken up with ads. So, our Bandcamp subscribers are what holds this entire podcast together, from the research to the writing to the recording and everything else. Today, gratitude is going out to Joyce, Katie, D. Corin, Taylor, Bob, Cleo, Patty, Dennis, and JPL42. Thanks to each of you for supporting this podcast. And since we have a lot to talk about today, let's now kick into the show. Part 1. The Battle for the Disney Board. Before we get to the two featured stories this week, I have a few updates to stories that we've been following for a while. The first update is in regard to the main story that we explored just last week. In our last episode, we highlighted the upcoming battle over the Disney board. Activist investor Nelson Peltz, accompanied by ex-Marvel executive Ike Perlmutter and ex-Disney executive Jay Rasulo, have put forward a request to add Peltz and Rasulo to the Disney board. Their reasons are fairly straightforward, that Disney is underperforming in terms of its stock price, and as Rasulo put it, that Disney has lost its way as a company. In essence, Peltz wants to have more control over the future of Disney by moving the company toward his vision, which admittedly is a little vague right now, that he believes will improve profitability and the overall value. To possibly make this happen, Peltz will be voting on behalf of those shares owned both by his company, which is Trian Partners, and those owned by Ike Perlmutter. Together they have roughly $3 billion of investment in Disney, which is a sizable voting stake. But this past Wednesday, January 3rd, Disney announced its own alliance with Value Act Capital. Value Act is an investment fund that focuses on companies that are undervalued or are moving through a period of transition, both of which I think might describe Disney right now. They have previously invested in media companies, including Fox. Value Act makes significant investments in the company's stock and then works directly with the executives to increase their long-term value. Typically, this process involves the company sharing sensitive information with ValueAct. ValueAct has indicated that they feel that the Disney stock price should have the potential to double over time. This past week, as part of a press release, they announced that they have entered into a confidentiality agreement that enables the company to provide information to the investment firm and consult with ValueAct on strategic matters, including through meetings with the Disney board and management. In exchange for the information and consultation, ValueAct has agreed to support Disney's slate of nominees for the board, putting aside those two nominees put forward by activist investor Nelson Peltz. In support of this alliance, Bob Iger said, ValueAct Capital has a track record of collaboration and cooperation with the companies it invests in, and its CEO, Mason Morfitt, has been very constructive in the conversations we have had over the past year. We welcome their input as long-term shareholders. The exact size of ValueAct's investment, and therefore the power of its voting bloc to support Disney's selections of board members, hasn't yet been revealed, but ValueAct's overall investment fund is just under $10 billion. In a separate move, which also muddies the waters here even more, Blackwell Capital has indicated that they support Bob Iger, but also they will put forward 3 nominees of their own for the Disney board. Disney said that they would review these candidates and provide a recommendation in regards to the overall governance of the company. But at the moment, this story, which we explored in detail last week, is moving toward becoming one of the key conflicts that may define the future of the Disney company as we move into 2024. Disney hasn't yet announced the date for its shareholder meeting, but I expect it to occur in March or April, and right now, the pro-Iger forces and the anti-Iger forces are scurrying around to collect up as many vote commitments as they can find. Part 2. Discounts and some other problems at Disney World. This second short update for today has to do with Disney's plans to better fill hotel rooms and parks at the Florida resort in 2024. We've talked about some of this before, that tourism is down not just at Disney World but across Central Florida. Over the past couple of months, I've also discussed this downturn with hotel managers and travel agents. Simply, advance bookings for the Disney World area and Disney World hotels remain down for almost all of 2024. In past episodes, we've parsed out the reasons for this downturn. They include inflation, a lack of consumer confidence in the economy moving forward, and a large wave of post-pandemic travel to Disney World that satisfied many longtime fans for a couple of years. Or to put that last reason simply, in 2021 and early 2022, after the pandemic, a lot of fans came to Disney World, and now many of those same fans are good until their next visit, perhaps in 2025 or 2026. Just after New Year's this past week, Disney announced a fairly long list of Disney World discounts that move deeply into 2024, all the way up into fall. Typically, Disney announces discounts for the next 3 or 6 months, but these discounts stretch out for nearly 10 months, almost up into Halloween. And the depth and length of these discounts reveals how concerned Disney is over the soft booking numbers right now. The first new offer announced this past week is for free dining for Disney Plus subscribers who book at least a 4-night vacation package at Disney World with a hotel room and park tickets with the Park Hopper option. In terms of a helpful tip here, your Disney Plus email needs to match the email that you're using when booking the package for the system to recognize that you're eligible for this free dining offer. Though there are a few exclusions to what I'm about to say, generally, those who book a room at a deluxe resort will receive the full Disney dining plan, which includes 1 quick service meal and 1 table service meal each day. Those who book at a moderate or value resort will receive the quick service dining plan, which includes 2 quick service meals per day. To start out, here's a couple of takeaways. First, this offer indicates that Disney is looking at some very low occupancy rates from July through September. Typically, more families book Disney vacations at the start of the summer than they do later in the summer. Having kids in school, I believe one of the driving factors here is that kids on sports teams or in other activities typically have summer meetings in July and August each year. Specifically at many schools, the football team, the band, and the drama department all have meetings or practices in July and August to prepare for the new school year, making it a little difficult for families to book a vacation during these months. Hence, June is the most popular month for summer vacations at Disney World. And because of that, and also because of that general downturn in Central Florida tourism, July and August are looking very light on advanced hotel bookings right now, compared to where the resort usually is at this point during a typical year. The second takeaway from this offer is this. With the return of the free dining plan, if you're planning to be on property from July through September, you should absolutely book advanced dining reservations for table service restaurants as early as possible, likely 60 days before your vacation, as reservations tend to fill up quickly whenever Disney runs a free dining promotion. There's some fuzziness to exactly how many deluxe rooms might be eligible for this promotion, as Disney can sell some unused inventory in DVC areas as cash offerings to regular guests, making them into essentially deluxe rooms. So I'm guessing here that late in the summer, there might be as many as 4,000 deluxe rooms available for regular tourists, and let's say that half of them might be booked for this promotion, which is 2,000 deluxe rooms. The average occupancy is 3 people per room, so that's 6,000 people, each with an entitlement for 1 table service meal per day. Those reservation slots at table service restaurants, particularly for popular ones, are going to fill up very quickly. So if you're traveling to the resort during this period, make sure that you stay on top of your dining reservations. This is the first time that Disney has offered the free dining program since before the pandemic. If history is prologue for this discount, the most popular dates for eligible rooms for this period will sell out quickly. And the best values here will be for families of 4 or more people. Disney offers free dining for everyone in the same room, but the room price remains the same regardless if there's 2 people in it or 5. So the value of this discount improves when there's more people in the same room, as everyone there receives the same free dining plan. Guests pay the rack rate for the room and the full price for the tickets, but the value of the overall package increases when you have more people in that hotel room. Typically, this offer is not a good deal for couples or single travelers, as they can probably save more money by taking a room discount instead of the dining plan. But this can be a particularly good value for a family of 4 staying at a value resort. The Disney dining plan, which has been entirely missing at the Florida resort since the pandemic, comes back online later this week on January 9th for the first time in nearly 4 years. There is right now no free dining option for January, February, March, April, and so on. The free dining option is only during the summer. But I'll be on property later this week, so we'll talk about how this new dining plan is working out later this month here on the podcast. Beyond the free dining plan offer, which I'm pretty sure will be the most popular offer out there, at least right now, Disney is also offering room-only discounts. These will likely be better promotions for smaller traveling groups. Also, the room-only discounts are available for much of the year, not just for the latter part of the summer. The first offer right now is for most stays between March 25th and October 3rd. All guests are eligible for room discounts of up to 35% when they stay a minimum of 5 nights, or discounts of up to 30% with shorter stays. I should point out that dates later in the summer from July 8th through October 3rd have slightly lower discounts. I'm guessing that this is Disney's attempt to incentivize guests to move to a period outside of those free dining months. Or to put it bluntly, this is Disney signaling that the weeks after spring break and up till the early part of the summer are presently very, very soft in terms of hotel reservations on property. Like nearly all of Disney's room-only discounts, the percentage varies depending on which category of hotel you stay in. Generally, people booking a deluxe resort can receive up to a 35% discount, people booking a moderate resort can receive up to a 30% discount, and people booking a value resort can receive up to a 25% discount. And this is where you need to compare the two plans if you're going later in the summer. If you're staying at the Wilderness Lodge in July, let's say, at a rack rate of $600 per night, and if you're traveling as a couple, you're far better off taking the 35% discount, which is $210 per night, as opposed to taking the free dining, which for 2 people has a value of about $190 per night. If you're a family of 4, you're better off taking the free dining option. These offers, I should point out, are in addition to some existing offers that we've already discussed here on the podcast, which includes 50% off tickets and dining plans for kids from March 3rd all the way out to June 30th, minus those weeks around Easter and spring break. Also, there's a set of existing discounts for the months in the first half of the year as well that were announced some time ago. The release of multiple new discount plans that extend to Halloween season again indicates that hotel occupancy is nowhere near where Disney would like to see it at this point in the year, as most families tend to book a vacation about 9 months out. Disney World historically offers its best discounts about 3 to 6 months out. So if these discounts for summer and beyond don't fill enough rooms, I do expect to see another wave of discounting later this year, particularly to fill rooms in late spring and in mid to late summer. Now that Disney has pulled the lever on actual free dining plans again, I do wonder what discounts are in the future if room reservations remain soft in the months moving forward. Part 3, Magic Key Sales at Disneyland and the best time to visit the California resort. One short last update before we get to our main stories. In previous episodes, we've covered the on-again, off-again state of Magic Key annual pass offerings at Disneyland. Most recently, Magic Key sales were again stopped after the resolution to a lawsuit that claimed that certain key holders didn't have reasonable access to reservation dates to visit the parks. In Florida, the parks, at the moment at least, have more than enough space to absorb more annual pass holders, but in California, the parks are often filled with Magic Key holders. For the past 2 years, Disneyland has briefly opened Magic Key sales, allowing new people to buy in, often as previous key holders let their passes lapse. But sales of Magic Key annual passes have been relatively short-lived each time they've been offered. Typically, they go on sale and then sell out within a few days. Disneyland will again offer Magic Keys starting January 10th. The exact wording is that they won't be offered any earlier than 9 a.m. This allows Disney to push back the start time if customers overwhelm their online service before sales open. But again, I would expect sales, especially for those middle 2 passes, to sell briskly. Generally, that top-tier pass is seen by many as too expensive, and the bottom-tier pass is seen as being too restrictive in terms of blockout dates. Guests for the past 2 years have migrated more to the middle passes, to the Believe and Enchant Pass, which have a range of open dates minus some weekends and holiday periods, yet aren't as expensive as the top-tier Inspire Pass, which cost $1,649. All of the Magic Keys are expensive, so you'll want to look at how often you plan to visit the parks and also compare how much you'd spend on regular day tickets if you didn't become a Magic Key holder. Also, let me throw this out there as someone who has been to the parks very regularly for many years. In the past year, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday have routinely become very crowded again at the California resort, in large part due to annual pass holders. So, my best piece of advice for anyone planning to visit Disneyland is to, if at all possible, visit from Monday through Thursday. The difference in attendance levels in California between weekdays and weekends is far more pronounced than it is in Florida. Not only should you find the parks less busy and therefore more enjoyable from Monday through Thursday, you'll also find that some products, such as individual lightning lanes, are less expensive on those days as well. Anyway, I'm putting that info here about Magic Key sales in case any of our listeners have been waiting for a chance to buy into the Magic Key system. This Wednesday, January 10th, if that's you, is your opportunity. And now let's push on to our main stories. Part 4, the battle for Reedy Creek moves into 2024. Our first feature story is over the battle for the Reedy Creek Special District. We've covered this on many previous episodes, and again, I want to point out that I have absolutely no interest in turning this into a political podcast. In these segments about Reedy Creek, we are only exploring political factors as they affect or may affect the Disney resort in Florida in the years moving forward. As the framework for this Florida Special District, which includes Disney World, will impact the resort in the years ahead, we are only looking at the political elements here as they shape the context for Disney's future plans in Florida. Also, in these segments, I don't mean to suggest that there was never any reason for the government to explore how closely Reedy Creek was associated with Disney. There may have been very valid reasons for the state government to explore connections between Disney and its special district. But from a legal standpoint, the primary point of contention here is focused on the reasons that the state government dissolved the Reedy Creek District and then later replaced it with the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, which for simplicity now we'll simply call the CFTOD. Disney's assertion here is that the state dissolved this district in retaliation for Disney's comments about a controversial education bill focused on issues of gender identity and sexual orientation. All comments or critiques of legislation offered by a company or by individuals are protected from government retaliation under the First Amendment. Having read DeSantis's political autobiography, The Courage to Be Free, and various op-eds that he's penned, I would say that statements in these documents do suggest that the motivation to dissolve Reedy Creek may have been tied or partly tied to political motivation and policy retaliation. And this is the center of this dispute. Not if the state has the right to dissolve Reedy Creek, it does, or even if the dissolution was beneficial to Central Florida, but if the state acted in a way that violated Disney's right of protected speech by dissolving the district in this manner. Before Reedy Creek was dissolved and before the DeSantis-appointed CFTOD board took over governance of the district, Reedy Creek board members friendly to Disney approved a multi-year agreement with Disney that shifted the ability to expand the resort in certain ways from the district board to Disney itself. In effect, This then limited the role of the future CFTOD board members to largely overseeing roadwork and public services. These contracts typically would be binding even if power was then transferred to new board members, especially as these contracts were discussed at public meetings and then arranged with a vote. We've explored these elements in previous news episodes at length, so I mostly want to bring us all up to speed as to what has happened over the last 4 or 5 months as a way of helping us follow the story, as it will almost surely expand in the first half of 2024. That is, this segment right here is to get us all ready for the battle that is likely to expand in Florida and federal courts in the coming months. At the moment, the battle has moved from public opinion into the courts and then back again, largely with each side hoping to shape the fight in a way that is more favorable to their position and goals. That is, there's a lot of legal wrangling, but very little has changed in terms of the framework for the newly created CFTOD. One element that has changed here, at least in terms of the overall context for this fight, is Republican primary polling of Governor DeSantis. A year ago, the battle between DeSantis and Disney, from a certain strategic angle, might have been viewed as the means to establish DeSantis as a strong presidential candidate, and for a while that worked both at the polls and in terms of fundraising. But as 2024 begins, DeSantis is not only trailing Trump in every primary poll, he's also trailing Nikki Haley in many of them as well. In New Hampshire, DeSantis is polling at 7%, while Haley is at 25% and Trump is at 44%. In South Carolina, DeSantis is polling at 13%, while Haley is at 21% and Trump is at 50%. In national polls, Trump is at 61%, while DeSantis and Haley are both at 11%, which is a substantial change from last March, when DeSantis nationally was at 36% and Trump was at 44%, and Nikki Haley was in the single digits. And again, these observations are here to indicate that though once Republican strategists may have capitalized on DeSantis's battle with Disney as a way to demonstrate how he, if elected president, could also stand up to other large companies, these same strategists are now shifting away from DeSantis and beginning to frame the primary around what looks to be more of a showdown between Trump and Haley. That is, at this point in the election cycle, political strategists have far less incentive to advance the DeSantis-Disney battle as part of a national narrative to highlight the governor's abilities. In fact, as his presidential prospects have gone down, DeSantis has started to refocus on policies that benefit Floridians rather than on policies that frame him as an alternative to President Biden. For example, in December this past month, DeSantis changed his position on federal funds for a home energy rebate program that, through the Biden administration, would offer thousands to low and middle income residents looking to upgrade their appliances, including costly heat and AC units. At one point, the opposition to the Biden program was part of DeSantis's presidential platform. But as his national platform has started to crumble, his gaze has been more focused on how state policies affect those in Florida, rather than how those policies create a sharp contrast between his views and those of the current president. There are now, for example, state funds to administer the federal rebate program in the state of Florida. I point this out because as polling in the early primary states shifts away from DeSantis, he has become more open to policy changes when they benefit the state, even if they go against part of his previous national platform. That is, there is now the possibility that both DeSantis and some Florida Republicans may start to back away from the battle over Reedy Creek. The political value of presenting Ron DeSantis as a strong leader who specifically challenges large corporations has far less currency now that his polling numbers have shifted from 36% nationally down to 11%. So I do think that there will be some meaningful change in this battle in 2024, but we're not yet to that point, though I think we're headed in that direction. The strategy in the last few months has been for each side to create favorable frameworks in the courts as the two cases slowly move toward trial dates. Many of these maneuvers have been focused on attempts to dismiss or reduce aspects of each lawsuit. Essentially, both of the sides here would like to arrange the framework for these two possible trials, one in state court, the other in federal court, as to limit their exposure and to move toward a more favorable outcome. So this story here is about the wonkiness of legal maneuvers as we advance toward the real showdown, which is coming later this year. Here's how those maneuvers have played out over the last few months. Back at the end of September, lawyers for DeSantis and the state asked a federal judge to dismiss the Disney lawsuit. The Disney suit proposed that the state of Florida unconstitutionally dissolved Reedy Creek in retaliation for statements that the company made about the Florida bill. The request to dismiss the suit was based on the state of Florida having the ability to decide the governing structure of the district, even if Disney was the majority landowner. Again, Disney pointed out that the dissolution of the district was an attempt to use governmental powers to punish those who disagreed with political officials. At this point, the Disney lawsuit was still moving forward as the suit was not dismissed. At roughly the same time, in an Orange County circuit court, the CFTOD board charged that the agreements between Disney and the old Reedy Creek board should be null and void, even though they were arrived at after public discussion. These were those agreements that shifted some development power from the district board to Disney in terms of the expansion of the resort in the years moving forward. Disney charged that the CFTOD was trying to breach valid contracts for political gain, even though those contracts were arrived at in a legal and public manner. Neither of these requests changed the directions of the two lawsuits. Then, in October, Disney worked on gathering information and evidence for their case. In the middle of the month, they subpoenaed John Glass, who was the previous administrator of the district. Disney also requested text messages, emails, and other internal documents from the DeSantis office to bolster their case. A few days later, the CFTOD asked a state court judge to throw out Disney's suit that alleged that the CFTOD had violated district contracts, specifically those contracts that shifted some power from the board to Disney before the governor's appointees took over board seats. The rationale was that the contract significantly limited the powers that the board should have in order to govern the district. Then, at the end of October, Disney requested that a Florida judge delay any ruling as to whether a case could proceed because, despite making repeated official requests, DeSantis' office had failed to produce a single document as part of discovery. This request pertained to the state case, which was focused in part on whether the contract between Disney and the former Reedy Creek District was enforceable or if the CFTOD could declare it null and void. The request in part was to demonstrate that the governor's office wasn't complying with reasonable requests for information and therefore wasn't acting in good faith. Perhaps it was also to suggest publicly that the DeSantis team had something to hide. In November, the ground battle moved briefly from the courts back into public space when each side tried to paint a picture of the other as acting in ways that were less than honorable, and again the blows were delivered by both sides. In mid-November, a story broke that the new CFTOD board awarded a no-bid $250,000 contract to pay a political insider, essentially using money that Disney had paid to the district in taxes to hire someone close to the DeSantis camp at an hourly rate of nearly $500. When questioned, a spokesperson for the CFTOD board said that the CFTOD was under no requirement to openly solicit bids for this type of legal work. The CFTOD then produced an 80-page report that accused the previous Disney-sponsored Reedy Creek board of putting forth similar anti-competitive sweetheart deals for friends, or in the words of the report, the most egregious exhibition of corporate cronyism in modern American history. Now, I don't know, but this seems a little like overstatement. I'm not sure how the writers define the phrase modern history, but that time that the Secretary of the Interior accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in bonds to move forward the lease of Navy oil reserves to a chummy company is probably worse than anything that has ever happened in terms of cronyism in any Florida special district. This same report accused Disney of running Reedy Creek as a monarchy with only puppet leaders. Disney fired back that the CFTOD report was an exercise in revisionist history. After this, the CFTOD, again trying to cast themselves in a positive light, announced that they would now focus on issues of affordable housing and traffic congestion that the previous Disney-friendly Reedy Creek board had ignored. One plan that the board floated was that they might support housing projects slightly outside of the district for those who worked there. But even before the CFTOD took issue on this, Disney had already announced that it would build about 1,300 affordable housing units on its own property, with the first wave of those units opening to residents in 2026. Then, in early December, the CFTOD informed its employees that collectively they owed millions in back taxes as their annual passes to Disney World, which had been part of their previous employment package, hadn't been properly taxed by the Reedy Creek board. This was an attempt to paint Disney as financially irresponsible, while elevating the ethical stance of the new board. The new district administrator then announced that the board was looking for ways to absorb the cost so that it would not be a burden to current employees. It was a top priority of our leadership team to ensure that our employees are not penalized for previous failures, he wrote. Shortly after this, there was then a sex scandal that surrounded CFTOD board member Bridget Ziegler, a former co-founder of the conservative political group Moms for Liberty, and her husband Christian Ziegler, the Florida GOP chair. Bridget and Christian Ziegler admitted to being involved in a threesome with a woman who later accused Christian Ziegler of sexual assault at her apartment while she was there alone. Sexual assault, if proven, is a felony, an inexcusable act of violence against an individual, but some other talking points in the feud at this point remained group efforts to shape public opinion. Outside of the mudslinging, a group called Disney Defenders, which was unrelated to the official Disney company, organized an effort to get the issue on Florida's 2024 ballot, in which the public might weigh in directly on the issue with an eye toward returning the district to the old Disney-friendly Reedy Creek charter. In a separate effort during these same exact weeks, a Democratic senator from Orlando, Linda Stewart, started to prepare a bill to overturn that previous bill, an effort that with Florida's Republican-controlled Congress would be at best a long shot. But there was a possibility. Now that some Republicans in state were shifting from supporting DeSantis to supporting Trump, that the Reedy Creek redo proposal might pick up some bipartisan support, as the Disney-related issue might be seen by some in-state voters as unnecessary and even problematic political baggage for business-friendly Republicans as they moved into the 2024 election. Finally, on December 12th, a federal judge, Alan Windsor, heard arguments in which the CFTOD requested that the suit be dismissed, while Disney put forward its claim that the dissolution of Reedy Creek was intended as political retribution for protected speech. Windsor said that he would put forward a ruling in the next couple of weeks. And then, at the end of December, Disney explained that the CFTOD had still not turned over records related to a request first issued last May. Disney alleged that the CFTOD was attempting to hide material that would be useful to Disney's case. And this, generally, is where things stand right now. We are mid-story, without a conclusion, or even a strong indication as to how these cases will likely turn out. I do think that based on DeSantis' book and other statements, Disney does have a strong case that the dissolution of Reedy Creek was a type of retaliation for former CEO Bob Chapek's comments about a Florida bill, and so I've included this partial story here in our January update, as I believe that we are moving toward moments where the legal elements of these cases will begin to play out in courts and where there will finally be some resolution as to how this special district will or won't be connected to the original Reedy Creek Improvement Act and agreement in state that goes all the way back to the time of Roy Disney in 1967, long before Disney World was built in Central Florida. But the conclusion to this story is something that lays in the months ahead. And now our final part, Part 5, the art and meaning of Luminous. There's been trouble out on World Showcase Lagoon a little over 4 years ago. What I would call the best nighttime spectacular at any Disney park, Illumination's Reflections of Earth, had its final show. It was replaced by Epcot Forever, a temporary show, which was then replaced by Harmonious, a show that was intended to play there for many years, but made it just a couple of years before its massive Stargate screen and those other tall barges were towed out of the lagoon, leaving Epcot Forever a modest effort to play on the water until the barges for the next show could be completed. That show is now called Luminous. I've seen Luminous at Epcot multiple times now, so in this review, I want to talk about not only the show's strengths, but also some elements that I think will increase your enjoyment of the show when you see it next. As mentioned, Luminous is the replacement for Harmonious. I generally liked Harmonious. It was a show in which part of the spectacle was its technology, specifically watching how the unusual machinery produced interesting visuals. I had 3 basic critiques. First and most obviously, that mechanical Stargate parked out on World Showcase Lagoon detracted from the sightlines of the international pavilions. Second, the closing section of Harmonious was emotionally unsatisfying in terms of a finale, with its soft music and closing narration. And third, Harmonious was a show focused on Disney characters and film music, especially with song arrangements that felt very close to the versions in the films themselves. That is, Harmonious felt as though it would be more at home in a character-focused park such as the Magic Kingdom. The big news here is that the tall barges from Harmonious are no longer cluttering up the lagoon. For the most part, the barges for Luminous now move out of the lagoon at night with some exceptions. Over the winter holidays, the barges didn't move out of the lagoon every night. I'm guessing that this had to do with crowd flow issues. The barges can be removed from the lagoon after the park is closed, but that drawbridge needs to go up as the barges return the following afternoon, breaking up crowd patterns around World Showcase. Just as with Illuminations years ago, it appears that during peak periods or periods of high winds, the barges can remain in the lagoon with the pyro being reloaded into launch tubes while the barges are there. But generally the barges come back into the lagoon each day, typically in 2 groups of 3. And it is a pretty tight fit in that little canal without a lot of room on either side of the barges as they pass beside the drawbridge and move out onto the open lagoon. At times, Luminous wants to explore far weightier topics than those in other Disney World nighttime shows. For example, the fireworks at the Magic Kingdom and Fantasmic at Hollywood Studios at best explore danger, even though in Fantasmic, it's danger found in or attached to the imagination. But Luminous is a fireworks show that wants to, at least at times, explore human sorrow, elements of grief, loss, and fear of death, something that would feel far out of place in the Magic Kingdom. Luminous asks guests to reflect upon their own losses and not simply to relate to loss as characters experience it on screen. This is a show about the actual life experiences of real people watching the show, rather than stories about animated characters up on a screen. And I think this is one reason why the show will likely grow on me. For decades, I used to stay at Epcot until closing to see Illuminations, even if I just passively watched it from wherever I happened to be at 9 p.m. It was a way of enjoying an artistic expression of large themes, and though I don't think that Luminous reaches the same artistic heights as Illuminations, I do think that it moves in that direction to the point where I can easily see myself watching this show for years, touching down into themes that have space for reflection and contemplation, which is an unusual entertainment space to create in a theme park, but one I very much like. Or to put this another way, evening shows, to be successful, need to reflect the character of the host park. The evening shows at the Magic Kingdom and at Hollywood Studios are for families, especially those with young children. But at Epcot, over many years, the various versions of Illuminations were for adults, shows that had deeper meanings that were often lost on younger viewers. Illuminations, Reflections of Earth, perfectly fit the vibe of Epcot. In contrast, Harmonious was a family show, and in part it didn't fit Epcot and its traditions because of that. Harmonious was also a show filled with familiar animated characters and the presentation of Disney songs whose arrangements evoked the versions presented in the films. And Luminous, even if it has some weak or slow spots in the middle, is a show more targeted for adults. It's also a show that distances itself from the movie versions of the songs that are in it. There was a company mandate for designers to include, along with 2 original compositions, familiar Disney songs. But those who developed this show used versions of those songs that were different enough from the film versions that, at least for me, they didn't immediately call up images from the films. Though Luminous doesn't pull back the entire team from Illuminations, it does contain some key people. The most significant is pyro artist Eric Tucker, whose shows are often visual expressions of music and emotional experiences far beyond a familiar sense of awe. Everything that happens pyrotechnically happens for a musical reason, he said. And this is clear in the show itself. The show also has some connections to Harmonious, most notably through Steve Davison, who oversees parades and spectaculars at many Disney parks. But the unstated goal for Luminous seems to be to connect this new show with older Epcot spectaculars, mostly bypassing more recent efforts such as Epcot Forever and Harmonious, to create a show that is a descendant of Illuminations, Reflections of Earth. There are echoes of Illuminations even as this new show opens. Illuminations began with the narrator announcing, "We are gathered here tonight around the fire," whereas Luminous uses similar but not identical language. "Welcome to the great gathering," it begins. That welcome message is then radiated across World Showcase Lagoon from pavilion to pavilion. One of the things I liked about Epcot Forever was the inclusion of Walt Disney's voice in the presentation. Walt's voice is also in Luminous, though it's a little bit hidden. You can hear it in the introductory welcome segment. Air-launched fireworks move from pavilion to pavilion with a single shooting star rising up from each country as that country announces welcome in their home language. After the full circuit, there are 2 more welcomes. The first is the voice of Walt Disney, culled from his 1955 dedication speech at Disneyland. It's just the word welcome here, but it comes from, "To all who come to this happy place, welcome." It's hard to hear as it's timed to coincide with a circle of fireworks being launched toward the center of the lagoon. It's right after Bienvenidos, and it's right before the final welcome, which are voices from Around World Showcase. If you focus in on this section, I'm pretty sure that you'll catch it. Beyond the familiar introduction, Epcot also has signature fireworks arrangements, the single shooting star or comet, and the perimeter launches from around the lagoon that create the luminous circle around World Showcase. These are all, of course, in luminous. At this point, any World Showcase presentation would feel a little incomplete without them, but they are introduced early as if the designers wanted to say in those early moments, here are some things you'd expect. Now it's time to move on to brand new effects. The show opens with a song called Heartbeat Symphony. Overall, Luminous has far more songs with lyrics, also more straight narration than Illuminations. But also, this is how Luminous presents and defines its themes, with words. In many ways, this is a stronger plan for guests who only see the show once. One of the aspects that I loved about Illuminations' Reflections of Earth is that it allowed viewers to discover and explore its meanings, which were revealed over many viewings. But here, Heartbeat Symphony announces the show's thesis with the lyrics. "You are part of me and I am part of you," the singers say. And this is the overriding theme that connects the show. It asks us as viewers to consider how our relationships, or even the absence of relationships, defines our emotions and how we understand ourselves. Unlike Illuminations, this show is framed with narration, with each section defined in a few sentences as it starts. The narration does explain the emotional movement of each piece, and I think that maybe a little less narration might have made the show more powerful. Illuminations had power because it used images and music primarily to convey its message, creating a show that encouraged viewers to explore it in new ways through repeat viewings. But the narration here, I think, mainly serves to focus new or once-in-a-lifetime visitors on the show's intellectual materials. And though the show would be stronger with less narration, I think my desire for more music and less talk is just a minor quibble. From Heartbeat Symphony, the show works mostly chronological as a journey through life, starting with birth or, in the context of the show, the relationship between a newborn and its parents. And in this section, we're asked to think back to our early experiences and to the people that shaped our lives when we were young. The narrator, which is the voice of humanity, asks us to consider, cradled in tenderness, we tune ourselves to the world around us. The big visual shift in the show is the removal of projected images of animated characters on massive mist screens and the addition of abstract design created by fountains and lasers passing through mist. I do think that the designers here likely considered how little film IP could be used in this show while still fulfilling the company mandate to use elements from film. And so here, whereas Harmonious deeply embraced filmic elements, Luminous pointedly walks away from them. For Epcot, that's a really good trade. From the show's opening focused on birth and family, it then moves into its middle sections, which are focused on how we form relationships, first with family and then with others through play. This might be the weakest part of the show, because it presents youth with exuberance as a series of positive experiences. But my concerns here mostly fall away as the show continues. Much of this stretch is set to You've Got a Friend in Me, which is transformed from that melancholy version sung in Toy Story by Randy Newman to one that is filled with celebration. Newman's version suggests that you have a friend in me to make up for the hardships and loneliness found out in the world. The version in Luminous, though, feels more like a jubilant expression of finding friends everywhere, which really wasn't my experience growing up. Good friends were difficult to find, and relationships, once found, were treasured. And one of my small critiques here is that the show would have had more depth in this section if it also contained an element or two of the difficulties and struggles of growing up in terms of finding and protecting those relationships that support us. The section that follows on romantic love has more emotional depth both in the music and the visuals. One of the songs that supports this section is So Close from the film Enchanted, which is a good pick as it's not overused in the parks. It's presented as a single male voice with piano accompaniment, which is arranged with notes of sorrow, loss, and risk as well as hope. But the strongest section in the show is the next section, focused on death, loss, and grief. From there, as Luminous moves into its final acts, the show also has a vocal homage to Harmonious. Harmonious began with a single female voice singing solo notes in search of other voices. That same approach, a female voice calling out with notes in search of others, is the introductory section for Into the Unknown. And this is a song that is used frequently in other Disney fireworks shows, but here, without lyrics, with voices presenting the melody without words, the song feels deeply distanced from the version in Frozen 2, more attuned to the needs of an Epcot show than fueled with a desire to celebrate the film. The concluding movement of the show suggests that we should focus on gratitude for the friendships and the loves that we have. And at this point, the show moves into its second original song, which is called Beating of Our Hearts. The final minutes of the show build toward new fireworks presentation, and this, no doubt, is the work of Eric Tucker. Most fireworks shows repeat shell types, familiar colorful blossoms filling the sky one after the other. But this show seeks to expand the visual variety of its presentation. In its final minutes, a tower, barely noticeable from the shore, rises up from the center barge, which allows a swirl of low-altitude shells to be fired at the audience, a quick presentation of dozens and dozens of fireworks to create a white-hot dome above the center of the lagoon, which has been described as a 360-degree presentation, but it's probably closer to a 270-degree presentation. This is a new structure for fireworks, at least at the American Disney parks. This presentation then quickly transitions into the other iconic visual for the show, cannons on the outer barges that send up a perfectly timed grouping of shells that midair form the outline of a heart. These are the visual highlight of the show. Multiple launchers work together to create the outline of a heart, and once that shape is high enough, these fireworks have a slight color shift, glowing brighter and taking on a slightly deeper color value to produce the strong outline of an airborne heart before it fades again into blackness. Another effort I like here is that this show, at least at times, visually unifies the entire park by integrating the lights on Spaceship Earth into the show. The lights on Spaceship Earth are on in the early and the final moments of the presentation, but the goal here is to create a show that is visually performed throughout the length of the park, from Spaceship Earth down to the lagoon and even over to the American Experience. One of the most notable changes, again, between Luminous and Harmonious is that this show offers a shift away from projected images of animated characters and toward abstract designs created by fountains and fireworks. For Epcot, that is a really good trade. Steve Davison, the show's executive producer, explained it this way. Because by putting projections in the show, we're telling you what to see. By not putting it there, by using color and light and texture and sound, we're letting you paint your own journey in your mind. The show, then, is a presentation of mostly abstract designs, from the fountains to the lasers and, of course, the fireworks. Most of these images, except for the fireworks arranged into the symbol of a heart, don't have a fixed meaning attached to them, which allows viewers to place their own meaning into the show. The show, from this perspective, is a type of dance with fire and water and lights that invites viewers to reflect on their own experiences. Steve Davison also feels that this show is connected to our unique time in history, and I do think that this is key to fully appreciate the show. The show explores our current moment in history and what we, in the eyes of its designers, need right now as a people. Especially post-COVID, Davison explained, I think people have a hard time connecting again. That is, the show is not only meant to be a general reflection of human connections, but a reflection of human connections after a period of isolation due to the pandemic. Or to put this in slightly grander terms, the show is not about human connections in general, but a meditation on the value of human connections after a couple of years in which physical closeness to others was seen as a possible threat. The show not only asks us to explore our memories, but to contemplate how we move toward greater connections as we shift further away from the pandemic. One last thing here. Where is the best place to watch this show? Luminous is advertised as a show that can be enjoyed from any place around the lagoon, and I'd say that this is partially true. I've seen it now from a number of spots. Here are some things to consider. This show, unlike Harmonious, has a lot of height, with fireworks that blossom high in the sky. Because of this, the trees along some part of World Showcase Lagoon will block your view of the aerials. The trees at the water's edge of Canada, Morocco, and Japan are the most problematic in terms of blocking your view. The show, with its fountains, also has low elements. Some of the islands from certain sections of the shore partially block your view of the barges as well, and in places these low sight lines can change every 20 feet or so. As a rule of thumb, if you can't completely see the barges before the show starts, you likely aren't in the best spot to enjoy the show. Next, in the early and final sections of the show, Spaceship Earth does contribute in small ways to the presentation. So if you want to see those elements, Italy or the space to the right of American Gardens Theater is your best bet. I'd also suggest that the exact opposite location from the Point of Entry Plaza is a very good location as well. You don't see Spaceship Earth from there, but you do have an absolutely clear view of the barges, the fountains, and every aerial firework. Lastly, it's best to stand up front. If you're a few people back, you may have trouble seeing the fountains on the barges. This is a show for which people will stake out spots 30 or even 60 minutes before the show starts. So maybe grab a drink and something to eat and possibly your phone and find a spot by the rail. To close this section up, in Illuminations, the spinning globe, particularly as it opened into a flame, was a key visual that not only defined the show, but also became a specific memory around which many guests remembered that show. The counterpart here are the outline hearts created from fireworks. Perhaps those hearts create a more simplistic meaning than the globe from Illuminations, but this, The idea of compassion and connection in that symbol not only embodies the themes of the show, but it's also the most powerful and unique visual presentation on the lagoon right now. With the exception of some holidays, including New Year's Eve, Luminous is typically presented at park closing, unlike Epcot Forever. This show is worth staying for until the park closes, to take in its spectacle and to think back over the loves and losses in your own life as you stand beside others who are doing the same. So today we looked at the battle for the Disney board, the ins and outs of those new promotions at Disney World, the return of Magic Key sales at Disneyland, the expanding issues swirling around Reedy Creek, and an exploration into the art and meaning of Luminous at Epcot. And so you are now all caught up, at least for a little while, with this episode and the one from last week on news about the Disney Company. I'll be back next week with a new episode. As you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney Company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us over on Bandcamp as monthly supporters. On Bandcamp, you'll find over 200 episodes not available on iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join us there is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can become a monthly supporter at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in the show notes. Until next week, this is Todd James Pierce.